Hello, my name is D.M. Fitzgerald. I am the creator of the Mper Adventure, which is the chronicles of my D&D world. A big part of the backdrop of the Mper Adventure is the Deseratan Civil War. To find out how it started, we have to go back 15 years. The city-state of Deserata was ruled by Sylvia I, also known as Sylvia the Blessed and Sylvia the Builder. She had taken what was a few small towns and welded them into the city-state of Deserata. The queen and her consort Christopher had 7 children. Sylvia had had a daughter when she was much younger named Kelly, but she doesn't really factor into this story. Christopher and Sylvia's children were Brandy and Alexis, twins, with Brandy being born first. Then there was Deborah and another set of twins, Stephen and Susan. The last boy was named Joshua, and the youngest daughter was Chaldea. Sylvia was beloved by her people, but as she got older, she began to worry about who would carry on her work when she was gone. A sickness forced her to convalesce in another country with her consort Christopher, and they decided that this would be a good chance for Princess Brandy to be tested as the future ruler of the kingdom while Sylvia recovered. It was an unmitigated disaster. Brandy proved unable to govern. By the end of the 6 months, ministers were fighting in the ministry building, the army was plotting insurrection, and the Warpick Wizards Guild swore never to have a guild house in Deserata again. All this was laid at the feet of Princess Brandy. The princess also decided during this time to get married, but the husband, a ranger named Puglama, could not take the pressure of royal life. After 3 weeks, he disappeared, never to be seen again. When Sylvia returned, she quieted the government and reversed many of the divisive edicts that Brandy had enacted. With a heavy heart, Sylvia removed Brandy from the line of succession. Brandy left the kingdom and went to live in the high mountain castle of Tresmorlan. Alexis, her brother, felt that his mother had acted in poor judgment removing Brandy, and he went to live with Brandy along with personal guards and staff. Deborah was chosen as the new heir to the kingdom, and when Sylvia ascended into heaven to be with the goddess Chaldea, Queen Deborah I was crowned. The reign of Deborah was mostly uneventful. Only the Church of Chaldea suffered because Deborah didn't show the piety that Sylvia had rained down on the church during her rule. In the 8th year of her reign, Deborah, her consort Guy Astarte, and their son Junico were murdered in the royal apartments. The event shocked the city-state, and the ministers searched for a new monarch. They approached Prince Stephen, but he was a military man and didn't wish to enter politics. Princess Susan had been born with the mind of a child, and she never grew up, so she was removed from the search. Prince Joshua never spent much time in the city and lived in the far southern continent of Sada Kadesh. He had no interest in the throne. And last was Princess Chaldea, but she had taken vows to the church for a life of service, and she did not wish to be released, so the ministers looked elsewhere. Brandy and Alexis returned to Deserata. Brandy kept a very low profile, but Alexis pushed for his bastard daughter Shandis as the new queen. The girl was the product of Alexis and one of the minister's daughters. She eventually was crowned Shandis I. The reign was brief. After a month, she, her mother and grandfather were found murdered. The ministers at this point were introduced to Brandy's daughter, Distaria. There was no mention of who her father was. However, the 15-year-old enchanted all she met with her charm and her knowledge of statecraft. She was crowned Distaria I. For several months, things went smoothly. But then, people opposed to Distaria began disappearing. Investigations were held, but no traces of an assassin was found. The Chaldite Church claimed that there were irregularities in the stories told about Distaria's parentage. This caused priests of Chaldicea to be hunted by mobs through the streets until no priest dared leave the temple. In a final move, the newly elected high priest was seized by a mob and executed. Brandy Ceylon was blamed for the killings through a network of spies and assassins. She was sentenced to death by her daughter, Distaria I, and the sentence was carried out. And then the killings stopped. The Temple of Chaldicea was reduced, but allowed to remain. Distaria began dismissing members of the military, slashing the army to a tenth of what it had been. She also reduced the numbers of ministers and began more ruling by decree, like her grandmother Sylvia I had. There was peace in the city-state, but it was an uneasy peace. Some of the ministers called on Distaria's uncle, Stephen, to come to the city and talk to the young queen, to help her rule. When Stephen arrived, the ministers that were with him were arrested, and Stephen barely made it out of the city-state alive. With a heavy heart, Stephen established southern Deserata across the inland sea. He gathered soldiers that had been cashiered by Distaria and marched north to explain things to his niece. Stephen was told that most of the Deseratan army had been dismissed and that the common people were waiting to revolt in his favor. He had been lied to. When his army of 5,000 arrived outside of Deserata, he was met by Distaria's new army of over 20,000 men, mercenaries and foul spawn. Stephen fought a brilliant series of withdrawals towards the south, but in the end, Distaria's forces caught them and brought them to battle. Stephen's forces were shattered. Stephen was captured and never seen again. And it looked like the entire army would be obliterated, but they were saved by the intervention of the Chaldicea Paladin Cavalry. The temple had always remained neutral, but the prime paladin, a Gloria Martby, had led the paladins in the attack without orders from the temple. The paladins were slaughtered, but they brought time for the rest of the army to escape. The remains of Stephen's army streamed back across the inland sea and to safety. A year later, the Warpick Mages Guild came forward and said that they had found a boy who claimed to be Queen Deborah's son, Junico. Tests were made, and it appears it was true. The boy, now in his teens, rules southern Deserata. And that's what the Civil War is all about.